like all the way through the power engine. That's way more powerful.
Brought to you in part by Alpine Toyota.
Now that I'm using these new coil on plug setup instead of a distributor, they clearly stick up a lot higher than the old spark plug wires did. So this guy right here obviously isn't going to work anymore to cover it. But I do still want to cover my timing belt the best I can. The best option I can think of to make that happen is to actually cut these guys up. If I just take my grinder and cut just this piece here off so that it doesn't cover the coil and plugs anymore, but just covers the timing belt, that should work mint. And then there'll be the added bonus of being able to see my fancy red coil on plugs with my 1UZ. It's actually a beautiful day out today. It's nice and warm. So I think I'm gonna pull this thing out of the shop so you guys can see it moving a bit. And yeah, I think I'm gonna work on it out here where it's a bit more natural light. It's a bit easier to work on things, more room. And yeah, enjoy the nice day. I'm still blown away by how good this thing is at cold starting now. Once again, another day without starting it, like nothing. All right, so let's check out how this standalone is done wiring-wise right out of the box. And I gotta tell you, it is extremely simple. So sent with the Spitronics ECU is this wiring guide. And as you can see, there is barely anything that needs to be connected. So first off is red fused battery 12 volts. So if you look in the engine bay here, there's a couple of fuses here. And off of those was a big red wire that all it needed was a 12 volt to the battery. So I ran a line down, it's actually this one here, across front of the rad and over to my battery there. Problem solved. Next up is the red and black tracer wires, which are down here coming into the cab. You can see these thin red wires with the black tracers. That is for a switched power. And right now I have that run into the factory body harness here, where I know there is a switched 12 volt here to grab from. And then on that same bit of harness that the switched 12 volt comes in on, the tach, fuel pump, and fan relay all come in on the same harness. So the green, orange, and blue and orange. So we got the green, the orange, and the blue and orange right there, all ready to be connected to these guys. And lastly, there's a few grounds. So there is a ground coming straight from the ECU. And lastly, there's two more grounds off the engine harness itself in the engine bay. And these ground to the back of the cylinder heads. This is exactly like the stock 1UZ ground, so this should be super straightforward. Well, you won't really be able to see it back here, but there's one here that grounds to the back of the cylinder head, and the other wire is right there, grounding to the other side. And as you can see, as I mentioned, extremely basic. As it sits right now, I've got what? Maybe 5 wires connected for it to run. There's the 12 volt constant, the 12 volt switched, and 3 grounds. And it's ready to run. And that is how I have it connected right now. Nothing else is connected. And as you can see, it runs and drives. And this harness right here is the one I made in the last video. It picks up the few sensors that are not picked up by the new standalone harness, and it picks up the starter. The starter is the one that you can see right here is twist tied together. That is just a signal wire that actually triggers the starter to engage. I've also got the oil pressure, and I've also got the coolant temperature sensors. These are just ran directly to those sensors in the engine bay, and the oil pressure and the coolant temperature gets tied into these body plugs here that then talk to my gauge clusters so I know what's going on with my engine. And really the only other wire that I'm going to be tying into on the standalone is the tach output right there, which is a green wire, and that'll be this green wire right here. So all I do is tie that into the tach wire on my body plug, and I'll know what my tach's like. Well, I decided to make things a bit more, not difficult for myself, but definitely time consuming. I went to go wire in the old starter for good, which was pre-loomed with a bunch of the old ECU stuff in it going to a fuse box that's essentially not used anymore. And I decided to rip all of it out because it's not being used anymore, and I hate having dead wires running through my cab. So yeah, I peeled the dash apart here, pulled out all the old harnesses, pulled out the old fuse box, and I made a completely new starting harness with a new fuse and a new relay at the battery. And this is what the new starting harness looks like in the engine bay here. Nothing's mounted, it's not tidied up yet, but there's the relay, there's the fuse, grounds to the inner fender, and then there's 2 wires going into the cab. One is specifically for the starter, and the other one is the trigger wire. And the trigger is tied in right here out of the ignition plug. This is the start wire, so that little white wire going to the relay is that guy there. And then this big long black wire that's routed up and over and down is the new starter one. This also isn't tidied up, it's just mocked up in place, but if we take it out of gear, and yeah, if we go to test out the new starter harness. All right, well, I think I've got all of the wiring done and buttoned up, and I'm essentially ready to start putting things back together. As you can see right here, all of these wires are connected. The heat shrink isn't shrunk yet. I need to find a lighter. So that is starter officially 100% connected. Oil pressure right there. This is the tach. There is water temp. This one is trigger wire for the ECU to know when to turn on. That is essentially it for in the cab wiring that actually runs the standalone and tells my gauges what to do. And this is so compact, it should be super easy to be able to tuck this around the corner, tuck that guy in, hide it all the way up the kick panel, and guess what? Lots of room for my glove box. There, so the blower motor and venting is there, and as you can see, the wiring is nice and tucked up in here. I can easily put the kick panel on here and conceal absolutely everything, whereas before I couldn't even put the kick panel on here because this wiring was so tight to get up to the ECU that used to be tucked up here, which now isn't. Okay, and with everything wired up, I went to go test the gauge cluster, and the only thing that's not working is the tach. So I did a little bit of digging, and it turns out that I need to put a 10K ohm quarter-watt resistor in the tach for it to actually read. I guess it's kind of like the 3/4 swaps or 2RZ swaps and stuff. You need to have that resistor in there, which is funny because I used to have that resistor in this, but when I did the 1UZ swap, for some reason the early 1UZ ECU didn't require it, and it was making my RPM read all funky. So now I need to put one back in. Yeah, if you look carefully, you can see that blob of solder there that's not factory, and that blob of solder there. That's where the resistor used to be, and that's where I need to put it back. There, the cluster is now modified and ready to go back in. I ended up swapping the front panel off of another cluster because this one is cracked right there. And as you can tell, this is still the original cluster to the truck because it's burnt there from the fire. If we look at the back here, you can see the fire damage is there too. All right, cluster is plugged in. And as you can see, the RPM is way too high, but that's okay. Now I get to do the fun part. I get to plug the standalone into a laptop and see what my RPMs are truly at, then adjust the tach to match. So if we take a look in my glove box here, you'll see this USB cable, and this goes to a plug directly on the new ECU. Plug this guy into the laptop like that, and then I'll open the tuning software when it's ready. Now while I wait for the tuning software to load, oh look, there it is. I'll show you what we're gonna actually adjust here. So if you look right here, if you look, go behind your tach here, you see that little white screw right there. And if you dial that in and out, it'll actually adjust your tach position when it's running. Now that this guy's booted up, we'll turn the key on. There, looks like it's picked up the ECU. And yeah, right off the bat, it shows us like where our battery's at, water temperature, what the timing adjustment is, and what the map sensor is reading. And if we, oh, there's the RPM there. So if we turn it on, 600, 700, Yeah, see, that's at like $2,000. So I'll adjust that down. All right, got her about nailed. There's 900, 900, 23 grand, 3 grand. Alright, so most of the interior is buttoned up and put back together here, and there's only a few more things I need to do to actually take this thing out on a test drive. Like, the grille needs to go in so that it at least looks a bit more street legal, and there's a couple more small things I need to button up, but tomorrow morning I should be able to get those done and actually get this thing on the road and try it out. See how it feels with the standalone on pavement instead of just giving her juice in my yard. So, yeah, I'll check in with you guys then. All right, let's go for a test drive. So for the first time since the V8 swap, I've got a working oil pressure light. The temp sensor does work. I tested that yesterday, getting it up to temperature, and the RPM works. So yeah, let's go for a quick little drive. Something's going on in my front end. Yeah, I can't turn that way right now. Yeah, I can't turn left right now. Whoa! As it adjusts my ears, it got way more power. Oh, that thing sounds so much better! I'm impressed! Definitely something going on in my front diff. Like, all the way through the power engine. That's way more powerful. And smoother. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do.
Kind of a bummer that he'd bring it back in the shop to figure out what the heck's going on at my front end. I honestly cannot believe how much better this standalone makes this engine run than the factory stuff. It feels like a completely different motor. It is dead smooth all the way through the RPM range, and I mean, I didn't know it wasn't necessarily that smooth before, but it is smooth. Seriously, this thing hasn't felt so smooth since it was 3.4 swap. It's unbelievable how smooth it is now. I would definitely recommend you guys do the same standalone kit if you do a 1UZ swap in your rig. It's just nice. I don't know what else to say. Anyways, guys, that about wraps up this week's episode of Dirt Garage. I hope you enjoyed it. If you don't mind, can you please leave me a thumbs up? And hey, consider subscribing. I upload weekly Toyota building, wheeling, and off-roading content. Anyways, I'll see you next week. Peace.